Let's talk about walls. Alright, so you've cut your slats. You have a pile of them. They're ready to go. What's next? So I'm going to walk you through the tools you're going to need to tie off your yurt walls. Firstly, I drill my holes to 1/8 inch diameter. So I use 1/8 inch nylon rope. You can either buy it in 100-foot lengths at your local home building center. That's how I was doing it for a while. I have a supplier now that I can get 1,000 feet at a time. So that's what I order. I order on spools and then I cut to length. I really like nylon rope. That's my preference. I've been using it since the very beginning and I really like it. Nylon rope is a synthetic rope. It has a really strong tensile strength, has a strong break point. It's moisture, mold, rot resistant, so that's a huge added benefit as well. I use diamond braid, that gives it a little more strength and it melts really well so that you can tie off your ends. It knots really easily, it's really nice to work with. I'm a big fan of the nylon rope, that's what I would prefer. Some people use different things. Traditionally they would use like a sinew type material. That would be the traditional rope slat tying material. Additionally, I've seen other people use nuts and bolts. That's an option. I find that when you use nuts and bolts, you just don't have the flexibility that rope affords you. It's very strong, and that becomes a critical failure point when in high wind, high stress conditions. So your yurt is going to want to flex and move with the wind, and it's important that your whole unit can move together. What happens is when you don't have the unit moving together, you create stress points. Those stress points end up being failure points. So when you're using nuts and bolts, what ends up happening is because those nuts and bolts don't flex and it's very rigid, and sometimes if they're tightened right tight up, that'll happen. Additionally, what can happen is the nut, if you don't tighten them enough, the nut over time will loosen up and you're going to have nuts and bolts start falling out of your yurt walls. One yurt company I've seen, what they've done is they tied off all the slats with rope. And the very top slats they used a nut and a bolt. That kind of makes sense to me in a way. That's where the tension cable is lying and sitting on the yurt, so there is stresses there. I've never had problem using nylon rope on the top slats, so that's what I'll use as well, until I see that there is an added benefit to that. So otherwise, I prefer the nylon rope. I think that's the way to go. It's easily accessible, it's easy to work with. And it's just a great material all around. It kind of fits the feel of the yurt itself. When you start using nuts and bolts, it just takes away from the natural feel of the whole unit. Yeah. Your two most important yurt wall tying tools. You're going to need a pair of needle nose pliers and you're going to need a pair of scissors. The needle nose pliers are going to be used for holding the rope, pulling tight, kind of accessing little spots where your fat fingers can't, and the scissors are used for cutting the rope. Additionally, if you're working with nylon rope, you're either going to need a simple lighter or a butane torch. I prefer butane torch. I've used simple lighters for a long time. I've got many burn blisters over time using them, and you know, it works if that's what you're starting out with. I have a simple butane torch. It works really great. I'm going to show you what this is for in a minute. It's very important in terms of prepping and getting things right to avoid as much stress as possible when tying the yurt wall. Alright, so this is where we're going to thread our needle. So you're going to take off a length of rope. I just kind of guess, I have a pretty good understanding. You're looking to probably take maybe a 20-foot length. This is what you're going to use to start tying your yurt slats. So you don't want a piece too long to start with because it's going to be a pain in the ass pulling all that through. Otherwise you're going to, if you have too short, you're going to be tying many pieces, burning many knots, and that's also not ideal. So you're going to cut your piece of rope. You've taken it, you've cut it to length, however long you want. What you need to do is you need to make a needle out of the end of this rope. That's what the simple Bic lighter is for, or the butane torch. I'll show you with a simple lighter, just because that way that's what most people are going to have, and it works under the same principle. You're going to want to melt the end of your rope. Get this nice and warm until the nylon rope is kind of melty, almost dripping. Then you're going to take something, two pieces of material, and you're going to rub them together, and you're basically forming the needle right now. This is the needle. This is what you're going to use to thread each slat. So the better you can get this, the less trouble you're going to have pulling it through the slat hole. Remember, you're drilled 1/8 inch diameter holes. We're using 1/8 inch nylon rope. So the rope is the same size as the hole. So if you don't taper this needle down, you're going to have a real hard time getting it through the hole to start. Firstly, you're going to form an overhand loop. That's where you take your working end and go over the remainder of the rope. You're going to form an underhand loop by taking the working end and going behind the remainder of your rope. You see, now we have a figure 8. What you're going to do is you're going to take your working end and you're actually going to go down through the first loop you made in the figure 8. You're going to tighten by holding the working end and pulling on the remainder to tighten up your figure 8 knot. In the end, it should still look like a figure 8. The figure 8 is a basic stopper knot. It's a wonderful knot to know. It's a very basic, simple, beginner's knot. So I'd recommend, if you're having trouble with this, there's probably 1,000 tutorials online on how to tie this knot. Take a look online, do a quick Googling, master this knot before moving on with your yurt project. It is imperative that you're able to tie this knot and tie it tightly so that your yurt slats come out the best as possible. I'm going to quickly walk you through the slat tying process, and we'll go over it in a little more detail later in the video. So you're going to take your rope, you're going to tie your figure 8 on the end to create your stopper. So you take your needle rope, you go back through, you find the end. You're going to take the end, you're going to take your slat, you're going to pair up the holes. Make sure that you've paired evenly, either counting from the top or the bottom, so that you ensure that you're tying the same hole from slat to slat. So if it's the 4th hole on this slat, it'll be the 4th hole on that slat, and they should pair up. Otherwise, you're going to get some wonky yurt walls. This is the method I use. You can clean it up in the end however you would like, but this is what I prefer, and this is my signature style. You take your needle and you're going to put it through the back slat. Then you're going to tie it through the front slat and you're going to pull it tight. This is where it's important that you've tied that figure 8 knot at the end of your rope. Otherwise you're going to pull your rope all the way through, and that's very frustrating. So you're going to pull tight, which tightens that figure 8 knot that you've tied initially. I measure off to the next hole to give myself enough room, enough rope to tie with. Cut. These are 1 foot spacings. So in the end, if you do this consistently, all your extra bits will be the same length and it will look very symmetrical, which is nice. You're going to then tie another figure 8 This is where the needle nose comes in, because you need to hold the remainder of the rope while you tighten, so that you get as tight as a knot as you can. There's going to be flex, there's going to be play, it will be loose. That is not the end of the world. That's why the yurt wall works the way it does, because it has that flexibility. You're going to continue this, continue pairing up holes and tying slats. So before you pull it through, make sure you tie that figure 8. Pull it tight. Measure, cut. Figure 8. Tighten. And then repeat, repeat, repeat. This wall is almost complete. There's 3 wall sections in the 20-foot yurt design that I build. You can tie all the walls as one solid piece. I find though what happens is you end up with a wall that is just way too heavy and cumbersome. The design of the wall section is important so that they fit together symmetrically where they meet. The first thing you need to do when assembling your yurt wall is to test each slat. You need to test each slat for its strength and flexibility. So as I mentioned in our previous video where we cut and ripped our yurt slats, there's going to be knots and weak spots in the slats once they've been cut. So you're going to need to test each slat. You don't have to apply a whole lot of pressure. If it breaks under this pressure, it's no good. Otherwise, that's a perfectly fine slat. So, that one broke. It's an offcut. We're still going to use those for the end pieces of our yurt wall assembly. Because the end pieces are shorter, sometimes there are only 2 holes, 3 holes, 4 holes, 5 holes, 6 holes, 7 holes. We're going to need some of the broken pieces. They're still strong. We can cut them down and reduce on some of the waste. Having breakage is completely normal and to be expected. Unfortunately, the quality of the lumber that's produced these days in where you probably will have it available is going to be knotty. As a result, some of your slats are not going to make the cut. It is what it is, and that's the byproduct of this process. You will end up with more offcuts than you'll need, but ultimately, they're just scrap. You can burn them, dispose of them how you want. But it's important that we have the strongest slats for the yurt wall so that when it does flex and it does move, when there is wind, when you are transporting it, you're not breaking slats. If slats do break in the yurt wall over time through abuse, maybe you have heavy winds, maybe you didn't check them all to begin with. Sometimes slats get broken. The nice thing about the Yurt is you can cut them off and replace them, and you don't have to take apart the Yurt. You don't have to do anything drastic. They're easy to repair, easy to maintain, and it's why it's an ancient structure that has lasted so long and stayed so resilient, especially in Mongolian culture and in their way of life. You're going to need the same tools to tie your Yurt wall as you needed earlier. Your scissors, your needle nose, and your thread needle rope that you made up. In addition, having a clamp like this or a C-clamp is really going to just kind of help you out. It's going to be an additional hand while you're tying the slats so that they don't fall off. You'll see in the process. And this is what we're going to need to tie our Yurt wall. For this wall, we're going to have the back slat facing the right direction and the front slat going in the left direction. I'm just going to connect these. This is where the clamp comes in handy to hold the first few slats in place. When you're tying. Rope through a hole, through the second one. Pull your needle and threads through. Finish. Oh. Measure down to the next hole. Retie your figure 8 knot. And then you're going to tie an additional figure 8 knot to end this. Use your needle nose to hold tight near the hole to pull in the tension so that you can get this knot as tight as possible. Perfect. And we've started our Yurt wall. Now we're just going to keep adding slats until we have the correct number of slats in each direction. That is also slightly different in each wall section. This particular wall section will have 11 slats full size in behind and 12 slats full size on the front, and it'll be finished off with the shorter slats. You're going to need 2 slats with 2 holes, 2 slats with 3 holes, 2 slats with 4, 2 with 5, 2 with 6, 2 with 7. The main slats have 8 holes. So you can see there's a 2-hole slat, a 4-hole slat, a 6-hole slat. Down at the bottom you have a 3-hole slat, 5-hole slat, and a 7-hole slat to complete it. And that's it for tying your yurt wall together. You're going to follow whatever pattern you're using, depending on the size of your yurt, depending on how many wall sections you plan on having. It'll vary. You can check the description below for a link to my build list and instructions for the walls of a 20-foot diameter yurt in the style that I built them. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and happy yurting.